Your hands were made for greatness. Mighty hands for painting, paneling, and clicking the submit order button on HomeDepot.com to get that duvet. And these Egyptian cotton towels delivered right to your door. Do more with decor at the Home Depot. Save up to 30% on select bedding and bath. Now at HomeDepot.com. More saving, more kinds of doing. Valid on select items online only. Free delivery on select items $45 or more. Enter promo code BEDBATH15 at purchase for an extra 15% off. Visit HomeDepot.com for more information.
Welcome, everyone, to Creating a Family, talk about adoption and infertility. Today we're going to be talking about step-parent adoption. This is a subject that affects so many people, yet there are few resources on the issues these families may face. I think you're going to find this show informative and helpful. Here's a sample of what you're going to hear.
With the other types of adoptions we're talking about, most often, unless it's a kinship adoption, most often the adoptive parents do not have a prior relationship with the birth parents. In step-parent adoptions, there clearly was a relationship, and often that relationship comes loaded with all sorts of feelings.
This show is brought to you by Creating a Family, the National Adoption and Infertility Education and Support nonprofit. I'm Dawn Davenport. I'm your host, and I'm also the director of Creating a Family. You can find us and all of our resources online at creatingafamily.org. The Creating a Family show is underwritten by the Jockey Being Family Foundation, whose mission is to strengthen adoptive families through post-adoption services. As their founder, Deborah Waller, says, one failed adoption is one too many. You can support their mission by buying a bear or a blanket at jockeybeingfamily.com. And we thank them for their support. And speaking of their bears, one of the members of our community had sent me an email that she had heard about them through their support of this radio show. And so for Christmas, she brought her two daughters a bear. Now, she hasn't given them to them yet because it's a Christmas present, but she is going to, and I'll try to post a picture when I get one of the girls with their bear. But she said the bears were adorable and just the right size for her to tuck into their stockings for Christmas. Their stockings may be bigger than my kids' stockings, I might add. But anyway, something to think about if you are looking for the opportunity for Christmas presents. And this is kind of a twofer. You can buy your kid an adorable bear, but also support an organization that does a lot of good in the world of post-adoption and adoption in general. So thank you. All right, today we're going to be talking about step-parent adoption. Our guests are Will Waller. He is the program director at Jockey Being Family Foundation. And we have Dr. Susan Bronco. She is a licensed professional counselor specializing in adoption and assistant professor and director of clinical training at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Will and Dr. Bronco, to Creating a Family.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, so adopting a stepchild is the most common type of adoption. It's been estimated, I had to do the research on this because I honestly didn't know. It's estimated that over 100,000 stepchildren are adopted by their step-parents each year. I didn't realize it was that common. And yet the funny thing is there are few resources to support these families and these children. And we got an interesting comment that was sent in for this. It was actually part of a question that was sent in for this show. And she said, step-parent adoption is like the stepchild of the adoption world. I mean, think about that for a moment. We're going to circle back to talk about that because I think it raises a lot of some of the issues. Just that one simple sentence raises a lot of the issues in step-parent adoption. But anyway, before we get to that, I wanted to start with you, Will. In addition to being the program director at Jockey Being Family Foundation, you also have a personal connection to this topic. So can you tell us your story?
Yeah, so my mother had me, obviously, and at 4 years old, she was remarried to my dad, Rick, today. And so when I was 4 years old, he was my stepdad and then adopted me with full rights at age 4. So long story short, didn't really know a lot about my biological father from a young age. And so getting older, having Rick in my life, the father figure, really had a huge impact on who I am today and all the values and morals that are ingrained in me. So without him adopting me, I don't know where I would be today.
Yeah, I think a lot of stepchildren probably feel that way about the parent, about their parent, or I guess their step-parent, formerly their step-parent, their current parent. I wanted to come back to the statement that was the comment that was sent in. Step-parent adoption is like the stepchild of the adoption world. There's a whole lot of information packed into a short sentence. One is that I wanted to start by talking. I think she was actually addressing the lack of information and support. I believe that's what she was, from the rest of her comment, I believe that's what she was getting at. But I thought it was an interesting statement of some of the negative social stereotypes associated with step-parents and the role of stepchildren and their place in the family. I mean, come on now, Cinderella come to mind to anyone? Will, did any of these stereotypes impact you growing up, or did you even pay attention to them, or did you even associate them with you since you were adopted at a young age?
Yeah, so it's funny because anyone that says I have a stepdaughter or a stepson, I disagree with them because it's not even in my vocabulary as the word step. If you want to get technical with individuals who like the word step, I do have 3 stepsisters, but to me, I've never once in my vocabulary ever used the word stepsisters. They've always been sisters to me. They've treated me as blood, and going through my life, I've never been, hey, he's my stepbrother and they're my stepsisters. I understand some people believe in that, but I've never had those issues in my life growing up. It's always been one family. You have the roller coasters, ups and downs as a family, and brothers and sisters, and we're siblings, not step-siblings. So for individuals out there that want to say step, I would, hopefully you can later on in life call them, brothers and sisters, not step-brothers and sisters.
And we did get some questions about sibling interaction, so we're going to circle back to that because I think that is an important issue to talk about, is about how siblings view themselves and all of that. Dr. Branco, let me come back to you about talking about some of the negative social stereotypes. For Will, it didn't impact him. He was adopted young, and clearly his parents did a really good job of integrating their family. But do you see the impact of some of the negative social stereotypes influencing how both parents and children adjust in these type of families?
Well, I haven't seen it directly impacting the families with whom I've worked. It's been more the case like how Will described. However, certainly the first thing that came to my mind was that dreadful horror movie. I think it was entitled Stepfather or Stepdad, that came out a couple years ago. And certainly we still face this stigma with step families, but also with adoption. So you almost have 2 layers of stigma all wrapped in one type of family constellation.
Right, and it seems you're right, that's a good point, because we certainly know that there are negative stereotypes that can be associated through people in our society towards adoption. It's a good point. And the other interesting thing, I think, is that when I hear of the social stereotypes associated with, as Will calls it, the word step, it seems to go both ways. I mean, that step-parents are perceived as evil, and stepchildren are often portrayed as lesser than or othered in the family. So I guess our stereotypes seem to be kind of equal opportunity in that sense. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, actually. Dr. Branco, we assume that because a child is being raised by one parent who has a genetic connection, that this type of adoption does not share as much of the emotional issues as does, for a lack of better word, let me say, regular adoption, meaning adoption where both parents are unrelated genetically to the child. Is that what you see? Is that how Is that how it plays out? Because if you've got genetic connections to one, you avoid all of the emotional baggage that can come in when you're being raised by a non-genetic parent?
That tends to be the myth and the common stereotype, but it is not accurate because, in fact, what I find is that those kinds of elements that they share with more traditional, if we're going to call it that, adoptions, where there's not a genetic connection to either adoptive parent, is that when there is a connection to one, sometimes discussion or queries or thoughts or any number of things related to the birth parent go unanswered and go even more dismissed because people sometimes falsely assume that those questions aren't there because there is the biological connection to the other parent. I've seen that more clinically.
Yeah, I have heard that as well. And actually, Will, from what you were saying in your family dynamics, there was some lack of discussion. In your case, it may well have been because you were not interested. But did you see any of was there a point in your life that you did start having questions about your biological father? And was the fact that your family had so firmly unified as a family, did that make it easier or harder for you to talk about your birth father? Or did you never have an interest in talking about it?
No, that's not the case at all. My story is a little, I would say, unique from the standpoint that once I was adopted, I still had, I don't want to call them visitation rights, but I had the rights to still see my grandparents from my biological side of the family. So it's a little different from the standpoint at every age the question comes up is why. Why did he leave or why did she leave? What happened to? Was it my fault? Did I do something? Doesn't matter what age it is. It will come down the road at one point in time in life. My questions probably started at an early age to myself, but it was more when I got into high school and my teenage years is, you know, you're getting ready to play sports on a varsity level, you're starting to graduate high school, and the mind just starts to go, well, okay, I know I was adopted, what happened? And so still today I have questions that will never be answered because he doesn't want to answer them or he doesn't want to have any communication with me. So I believe that when you have a parent who adopts you from, you know, stepfather, for my instance, to a father, the questions don't come up as often because he treats you as he's your own, like all parents should, in my opinion. But you definitely have questions, and my parents did sit down with me at some time to time and, you know, give me answers to some of the questions I had. Did they go into full detail? No, but at the same time, the mind is definitely curious, and I'm not a doctor, but it's just when you develop, your questions become more in-depth and answers of, you know, my question was, why did he leave? What happened, you know, and he just, you know, the questions have been asked to him, and there's no answers. So, but, yeah, the questions are there. They've been there.
And that makes it harder when there aren't answers. Yeah, and that, you know, that brings up the concept of similarities and differences between step-parent adoption and, I guess for lack of a better word, I'll call it traditional adoption. And the similarity is, from what both Will, you, and Dr. Branco have said, is the questions, the not having answers to some of your own history. So that's a real similarity. Dr. Branco, what are some other similarities that would exist between step-parent adoption and traditional adoption?
What I think the earlier person who wrote in that question talking about it's the stepchild of the adoption world is also referring to is the lack of information we have about the similarities that I think could be so helpful. For example, as you were speaking, Will, I was in my mind seeing the developmental stages that are adoption related for adopted people. And everything you were mentioning kind of went through those stages as you were growing up. So there's a lot of similarities between how both types of adoptions are thinking about their birth families, and it could really be helpful for families to know what those stages are. So like what Will's parents did, they sat down with him and encouraged questions or tried to promote an openness in the topic. So there are many similarities that often go dismissed or unnoticed because, again, people feel like it's if you have one connection to a birth parent, then you may not have any questions about the other half of you. When, in fact, in this country, the DNA business is booming right now because everyone is so incredibly curious about their ancestry and historical roots. The same holds for adopted people, no matter what type of adoption it is.
Well,
yeah, and I think too, to add on to that, Doctor, I think that when the question comes up to why, it's when you have the different races. It's that you don't look like your mom and dad. So then that question comes up. Well, I don't look like my mom and dad. So what happened? Why am I here? And so I've seen a couple instances with people that we know that, their son or daughter might be turning like 4 or 5, and, the question is why. And so it's, in my opinion, it's those parents' job at that point in time to have a story to tell those children, because in my opinion, they wouldn't be ready to understand what happened. And I don't know what age is the right age. It's based off of the individuals themselves and the parents and the family. But that you got to have one story to tell your son or daughter until it's the appropriate time to really tell them the whole story.
Yeah, we start telling the story in age-appropriate ways. Well, Will asks a good question, Dr. Branco. At what age should, and this is assuming, of course, that the child has been adopted at a young enough age that they don't know, so that you're actually telling them part of their history that they don't know. At what age should step-parents, in this case parents, adoptive parents, tell their children, our child, that the father or the mother is not their biological family, father or mother, that they were adopted?
This is a question I get asked almost once a week, if not more. The gold standard right now is at the youngest possible age, even if it's before a child can actually speak. And the reason that has become the gold standard is because it promotes transparency and trust in your actual parents that are caring for you. What we are trying to encourage people to avoid is having a sit-down kind of traumatic moment when someone is older and they've gone through life believing one thing about themselves, and then there they are in middle childhood being told something tremendous that everyone else in their family, or so it seems to them, knew about, but they weren't told and they didn't know. So that kind of can create not only a traumatic moment, but also distrust in their parents. So we want to avoid that, and most parents don't want that. They think they're doing the best by waiting until they think the child can understand. But the best practice is letting the child know from the minute they come into your lives.
But Dr. Branco, I see it happening. Well, I mean, we certainly see it happening in all type of adoptive families where parents are generally, with good intentions, are waiting to talk to their child, and many times they say, I'm waiting till they're old enough to understand, or I'm waiting till they ask questions, or whatever. But it seems like with step families, or families that are created by step-parent adoption, that there's even a greater hesitancy because you don't want to either make the child feel different in the family or make the other parent feel different. So it's, and I don't know if you see this universally or if it's just what I've seen anecdotally, but there's almost a desire to, in traditional adoptive families, there's a general acceptance that we must address adoption. But in step families, it seems that it doesn't happen as fluidly or as often. Do you see that, or is this just something that I'm seeing through the people that are in our community, online community?
I also see that, and I will add another category as to why I think that happens. With the other types of adoptions we're talking about, most often, unless it's a kinship adoption, most often the adoptive parents do not have a prior relationship with the birth parents. In step-parent adoptions, there clearly was a relationship, and often that relationship comes loaded with all sorts of feelings, as do any relationship. So sometimes there's that element that it might also be traumatic for the biological parent that's remaining parenting the child. So there's lots of reasons why people are hesitant and don't want to trigger anything, don't want to rock the boat. And they're also joining as a step family, as a blended family sometimes. And that's got its own set of things that need to be worked out. And they're not bad, but there's just a different layer of merging and blending that happen that sometimes that takes over and becomes a priority more so than sharing about the step-parent adoption.
We're going to circle around to that with the blending aspect because we received a number of questions, and I think it's worthy of kind of a section on its own. One other thing that as I was thinking about this, that I'm wondering how this plays in, and Dr. Branco, I'd like to get your thoughts on it. And again, I don't know exactly the right word, but the word that comes to mind is an traditional adoption where neither of the parents are genetically related to the child. In a traditional adoption, the family unit is generally the parent, sometimes with another child or children. And so the newcomer into the constellation is the child. But with step-parent adoption, the family unit often exists, or most often would exist, and the newcomer is the parent, the at first step-parent and then the adoptive parent. How does that dynamic change how the parties interact? Does it create opportunities? Does it create issues? Things that parents need to think about. Oops, Dr. Branco, have we lost you? Oh, I think we did. She has dropped off. She will be calling back in. Will, I'm going to circle back. Well, actually, I'm going to take a moment while we're waiting for her line to be reconnected. I'm going to take a moment to remind everybody that you're listening to Creating a Family. And today we are talking about step-parent adoption, an important topic and one that there are few resources that are available there. I wanted to take a moment to let you know that this show is brought to you by the generous support of our partners, and it is through their support that all of our resources, but especially this show, is able to exist. One of our partners is MLJ Adoptions. They are a nonprofit, Hague-accredited adoption agency serving families across the U.S. who are interested in growing their family through international adoption. They also offer home study services to residents of Indiana. All right, Dr. Branco. Hang on a second. There we go. Now, Dr. Branco, we were talking about the dynamic where in a traditional adoption the family unit exists and the newcomer, so to speak, is the adopted child. In step-parent adoption, the family unit is the biological parent and the child or children, and the newcomer is the other parent. I don't know that makes a difference, but from your perspective, what is the difference there?
The biggest difference that I see is that typically the child and the birth/first parent that's parenting them already have an established attachment system in place. So when you bring in another parent, presumably that parent at that point is developing or securely attached to the other parent. Otherwise, they wouldn't be continuing the union. But now we have to work on developing an attachment with the child and the step-parent.
Right. So it changes significantly. So from a standpoint of parents going into an adoption, what would you recommend? This is something to think about, and how can parents ease that transition?
A step-parent adoption situation, and you've gone through the regular kind of rites of passage that you go through in terms of making sure your relationship is secure with your partner and that you're going forward and you're going to adopt the child. One, if the child is old enough, it would make a lot of sense to be having open discussions with the child about what that's going to be like, what that means for their lives, what that means for their family. If the child is still young, like in the case of Will, who was only 4, you can still talk to the child about what that means in the age-appropriate way. But planning in terms of developing trust in that relationship, developing joy in the relationship, and all the things that you do with your children. That would be something you would want to make sure that you and your co-parent are on the same page on of what that's going to look like in your family, just basic parenting strategies. Do you agree on discipline strategies and structure and boundaries and all those things that come with parenting? And having that be secure between the partners is quite important as a first step. Second to that, working with the child and letting the child know that this is what this means for our family, talking about permanency, talking about name changes if that's going to happen, even talking about birth certificate changes, because that's something that will also happen. That's all an important part of this process.
And yes, and important to for the child to be connected as well in that process. What about the age of the child at adoption? Will was quite young; he was 4, but he wasn't an infant. So, how does the steps that the parents take and differ depending on the age of the child? And the other thing that I really want to come down to on age of the child is the concept of divided loyalties. You know, if you've already felt attached to a parental unit and a father or a mother, depending on which one is a non-custodial parent, how do we help our children not feel that they have to give up their loyalty in order to be adopted? First of all, let me ask Will, from the standpoint, I think from what you said, you probably didn't feel a great deal of divided loyalty because there wasn't a firm relationship with your biological father. But I should ask and not make assumptions.
Actually, I do remember one of the first times my mom was in the dating process, and Rick came home, and I did not like him. I'm very protective of my mom. As a 4-year-old, you put your fists up like you want to box them. And that was just a way of letting him know, like, look, you have to go through me and not just her. And so we're a package deal. And I think the way that relationship grew was through how he treated my mom and how he treated me. And that's how you build the trust. You know that he's there for your mom when she needs someone to talk to or needs someone to love, and that just fell from how he treated my mom. It ended up how he treated me, and that's how it really knew that I knew at that age that I can remember that's how he got into our lives was, he knew that he had to earn my trust, and how he treated Mom and I was the way to do that. And really, we've definitely had ups and downs like every family has, but that was the first step, is getting that trust of myself and my mom at the time.
And he got that trust. Rick got that trust by showing you that he cared and treated your mom well, and by treating you well. What were the specifics of how he treated you? I mean, can you think of any examples that come to mind that made you feel that he treated you well?
It was just, it's going to sound lame, but, he helps you make a meal. He asks Mom to, go out to a ball game, or you get to go play out at the park. You do those certain things, and you come home and you have a good time, and you just watch their interactions with each other. It sounds really lame, but just seeing how they interacted with each other was huge, because I do remember, one time in my life where my mom and my biological dad didn't do that. And so that kind of stuck with me. But at the same time, as time goes on, you develop that relationship, as everyone does.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Dr. Branco, how common are the feelings of divided loyalty, and how does that play into age at adoption?
Before I answer that, I want to make sure, Will, I let you know that all those activities you mentioned are the opposite, in my opinion, of lame, because they are trust promoting activities that are really important, often go unnoticed, and that here you are this many years later, and those are the things that you distinctly remember and have an emotional attachment to. So
it's actually,
congratulations.
Well, thanks. And there's one, I say it's lame, but there's one that I'll always remember now. It just dawned on me. He helped me how to tie a shoe. I mean, that's
Yes.
one of the cool parental things. It's like, yeah, you put the loop and you put the loop under and you do all that kind of stuff. It's like the things like that. It's like how to shoot a basketball, how to kick a soccer ball. I mean, those things are how he helped me develop as the trust in him. And, if you fall down, you need a Band-Aid. Okay, we're going to go to the cabinet and put a Band-Aid on it. So those are small things go a long way from a child's standpoint at that age.
Everything you're describing, yes, fits under the category of attachment-related behaviors, caretaking, having joy with someone, and those are all lovely examples. So whether you know it or not, you're mentioning things that are backed up by scholarly research. So it makes sense that you have such a strong family.
Thanks.
But getting back
you.
to the question at hand, you're welcome. I'm so glad you brought up divided loyalty because that is yet another commonality with all types of adoptions. And again, I think what gets tricky in a step-parent adoption is because of those other layers I mentioned earlier in terms of the different feelings everyone's bringing into the relationship. Sometimes divided loyalty becomes dismissed or not acknowledged. So one way to help children with that is being able to openly, if you're in this place to do this and it's going to be genuine, if you don't feel like you're ready to do this and have it be genuine, that's when you should seek help from a professional counselor or another mental health professional to help you be able to get there, is to allow the child to know that just because you're becoming adopted permanently by another parent, by no means signifies that you have to let go of or give up any memories or loyalty or care or love that you have for the first parent. And that even means having some discussion about how they would like to keep the first parent's name in their name if they want it to be as a middle name, or what they want to do to continue to keep connection with that first parent. And allow that to be a discussion you openly have with a child, and also know that just because they may not want that at age 5 or 6, that might change as they get older, and to be prepared for that.
And at what age would you include the child? Would that also be for a very young child that you would include them on an age-appropriate level? They don't get to make the decision per se, but they certainly have a voice. Or would it only be school-age children that you would suggest involving in the process?
I think at any age that they should have some kind of say or involvement in the process. And again, that's going to be different for a 4-year-old than it will be for an 8-year-old. And in many states, the age of consent about adoption by a step-parent, I believe, is at some states 10 and most states 14. So that will create a whole different type of conversation. But I think that children should always be included in those decision-making pieces. Not the decision, because they don't have the final decision, but in how they'd like for that to look in their lives.
All right. Now I do want to move to talk some about sibling relationships, because I think it is crucial. We got a question from Sheila. She said, I adopted my husband's daughter the year after we married. She's going to give a lot of numbers. I'm going to go ahead and read them. She was 5 at the time. I've known her since she was 3. Her dad had full custody since she was 1.5. She's now 10. And my husband and I have had two more kids. They are 4 and 2. B, I'm not going to use the child's name, I'm going to use her initial. B is very, very jealous of our other 2 kids. She picks on them, and although she hasn't physically hurt them, it wouldn't surprise me if she did. Our family is really struggling. I don't even like her most of the time. That's a hard comment, but I would like to start our discussion about blending children with a discussion about blending full biological children with a stepchild that is then later adopted but is not a full biological child. I guess it would be a half-sibling, although I kind of agree with Will. I don't like the labels, although they help at least now they're helping in the clarifying our discussion. Will, did you have that situation where you had siblings where your parents had full siblings, you have half-siblings through your dad and mom? I'm not saying that correctly, but do you get the question?
Yeah, I get the question. So my dad had a daughter, and then there was me, and then they got married, and then had my two other sisters. So there's technically four of us in the family. So we got along just like brothers and sisters would. You know, you have fun outside, or you pick on each other and you protect each other. So we went as a pack. There was times that you argue, but at the same time, at the end of the day, we all love each other, and it doesn't happen every day out in the world. I understand that. So I've been very fortunate and blessed enough to be in the family that I am because of who my parents are and who my siblings are.
Yeah, it's good that it's always good when we can acknowledge that, we got lucky, we got blessed, and in this case, so it sounds like there wasn't a distinction between half siblings, and this is kind of what you said at the beginning. You don't prefer the term half or step. All right, Dr. Blanco, let's talk about let's talk about Sheila. In their case, the child that was adopted is struggling with the relationship. Any thoughts that could help her and her family on how to blend children who are coming to the family with different connections with the parental unit?
Sure. I think in the case of that Sheila described, in that situation, I see a couple things going on. She was an only child, for lack of a better word, for a while, and then came these two other younger children, and also coupled with that, her age. She's 10. The children came, I think, probably when she was around 6. So it would make sense to me that that's at the age when, again, this is another commonality between all types of adoptions. This is at the age when she's able to cognitively understand loss. So this might have been a time when she's really starting to understand, yes, I have this mommy who I love very much, but I also realize there's another mom out there that I'm not with. And now I'm watching this mommy take care of these babies in a way that she was not able to take care of me because I didn't know her. And I don't know if I was taken care of that way by my first mommy. So there's a lot of loss, and it's very hard for children to grieve that if they don't know what's going on. So in that family, I'd highly recommend seeking some outside help to see if any of those issues are what's creating some of the anger and jealousy towards the younger siblings, if that makes sense. Second to that, in terms of blending families where you have already children coming in from both parents, that takes a lot of careful planning and patience and openness to know that we are going from one system to now we're trying to join two systems. And you've lived the life of almost being only children in some cases, or having our unit be how it is, to now we have to blend and share everything with this other unit. So that requires a lot of openness, a lot of patience to discuss what that's going to look like, and to be tolerant of hearing things that people don't like about it, and to know that process takes a long time sometimes. And
to not get defensive. That is what I would have to constantly remind myself, is it's not helpful. I'm not being attacked. My decisions aren't being attacked just because somebody is not happy about the way things are going, and I need to not slip into defensive mode.
Right. And always to recall that a lot of times when just humans in general, when we're angry, that's often the secondary emotion to something else. And often in these situations, it's sadness or loss that even if the first scenario, the first family constellation wasn't healthy, like the way Will was describing, he doesn't remember quality interactions between his mom and his birth dad. But even if it wasn't healthy, it's still a loss that it didn't work out for a child, if that makes sense. So sometimes those losses are coming out as anger.
Yeah, I like that. Anger is a secondary emotion, often masking, covering over loss, and that is so true in all types of adoption. Let me stop a moment to remind you that you are listening to Creating a Family, and today we're talking about step-parent adoption with Will Waller. He is the program director at Jockey Being Family Foundation, and Dr. Susan Bronco. She is a licensed professional counselor specializing in adoption. This show is brought to you by the wonderful support of our partners who believe in our mission. And one of our partners is Hopscotch Adoption. They are a Hague-accredited adoption agency placing waiting children from around the world, offering home studies and post-adoption services to residents in North Carolina and New York. All right, I think we've already kind of shifted to talking a bit about blended families where we have a situation similar to what in Will's situation, where both parents, when they marry, are bringing a child into the family. So then you're adding a whole. Not only is the parental unit perhaps having a child of their own, a biological child of their own, but they're also bringing in children from a previous marriage. Dr. Branco, what are some of the stresses that come up? One of the ones you mentioned before is just the way families work, how they function, just the thousands of different things that define who we are as a family, and trying to meld those two. It's confusing. It's hard. So, and you suggested that the best solution is to bring it, to bring air to it, bring light to it. Just talk about it. Yes, this is hard. Yes, we have different ways of doing things. It doesn't mean that one way is better or worse. Other challenges that happen that you can think of, Dr. Branco, for when two existing families are being blended together in through marriage.
I think that a lot of it falls under that first category you mentioned. You're trying to merge two cultural units into one. So one recommendation I often will advise is that they have frequent family meetings. They work together to have family rules that are rules for the entire unit to start creating a new culture, but have that process be very transparent and have those rules be very visible, and maybe not even call it family rules because that gives a connotation like you're in trouble if you break it, but more about family, this is our family motto, or this is how we want our family to operate. Other challenges involve time because previously, like we have mentioned, children are used to a certain amount of time from their parents. When you blend a family, that time gets stretched. So it's important to make sure that you still create time to spend quality time, whatever that looks like for your family, for each individual child. And also, it's okay to not have everything be all the family together all the time. You can still go out and have lunch or do an activity you did prior to blending the family with the original unit. That is okay, and in fact, I encourage that. And not to do that every week necessarily, but just make sure you still have that time for you together, and that helps ease the transition as well.
Yeah, I would think that that would almost be crucial to know that if you've got something that you really enjoy doing with your child or that your child enjoys doing with you, that doesn't automatically end just because you're married or just because they're being adopted. I wanted to shift to the discussion, and Will raised it at the beginning, and he said he thought his situation was unusual, and I don't know if it is unusual, and that is he maintained a relationship with his biological father's parents, in other words, his paternal grandparents. We got a question from Crystal that I wanted to read as a jumping off part to talk about the change in family roles and ultimately openness. Crystal says, my husband adopted my eldest son 4 years ago. We have maintained contact with my son's bio grandmother, mostly through emails, but also with visits during the holidays and my son's birthday. She adores my son, I think in part because her son, my son's bio dad, is such a loser and my son is great. My problem is that she wants nothing to do with my other kids or my husband. She doesn't even acknowledge that he is her grandson's father now. She only brings gifts for her grandson. She only talks to him or asks about him. In a couple of weeks, she's going to walk in the door holding a pile of gifts for her grandson and nothing for anyone else. My husband thinks we should tell her that she is no longer welcome and that it's a bad idea for us. And he believes it's a bad idea for our son to continue to have contact because it makes him stand apart in our family. I'm torn because the relationship means so much to her. My son likes her just fine, and he definitely likes the attention and the gifts. So Crystal raises the issue of one part of openness, this is with grandparents, and we're going to circle back to talking about different types of openness, but I wanted to talk a bit about grandparents. Will, in your family, you had a relationship with your birth father's parents. How did that play
Correct.
out? Was it a relationship that was totally separate from your family, or did they adopt your family, so to speak, and they became grandparents to all? How did that work, and did it cause problems?
To be honest with you, I don't know if it caused any problems with my sisters. I've never heard any problems if there were. The way it worked though was both my sets of grandparents before they both passed away. They came to my 8th grade graduation, my high school graduation, until they passed away. But I think for Crystal's sake, I would say this, and this is just my opinion, and I disagree with her current husband to terminate the relationship with the grandmother because that's someone that his son needs in his life for some particular reason. Maybe it's a way in to his biological dad, because that's exactly how I was my grandparents were the way into my biological dad. I would learn things, what he was doing, where he worked, where his current wife worked. I mean, I developed information once I got older, and that's how I kind of started putting puzzle pieces together for my own story. But with the gifts and stuff like that, my grandmother would bring presents for my sisters, make cookies for the family. So she wasn't like that grandmother. I would challenge this grandmother to open her heart and mind to these other siblings, because it does affect the atmosphere at home from what Crystal's describing. And I think that relationship could be good. And it sounds like, just by what you're saying, Dawn, sounds like there's bitterness in the grandmother that that relationship ended. But I could be not, like I said, I'm not the doctor, but I would highly recommend that the relationship for the grandmother and grandson to continue, even though she is bringing gifts for the grandson and not the other kids. But I would challenge the grandmother to change her viewpoint and her ways of behavior as well.
Dr. Branco, thoughts for Crystal and how she might handle what is obviously a pretty confusing time. Well, first of all, let's just say, is it a problem that the grandmother is bringing gifts only for her biological grandchild? Is that really a problem?
Well, I want to start by saying I agree with everything Will mentioned. It could be a problem in that if the other siblings feel hurt by it, or if it is already a problem in that the dad feels off-put by this, because she's actively not acknowledging that he is taking over the parenting role for her grandchild. So that right there is problematic. So I like to encourage people to think of this as a network, and something that I worked on with the Counseling Association termed the network as the Adoption Kinship Network. So that way we're acknowledging that there are a lot of people in this system, and in this instance, it's the grandmother is part of this family now by default of having her grandson being raised in this unit. So I would encourage them to, in a respectful, compassionate way, talk with her about the impact that has on everyone in the family. And that doesn't mean he still can't get gifts, but maybe there's a more discreet way for that to happen. And I also agree that she's a connection and link to his birth family, his birth father. And probably there are a lot of hard feelings, possibly traumatic feelings or shame feelings that are going along with her that she's not ready to face, which is why she's compartmentalizing the relationship.
Let's broaden this also to talk about both you and Will have mentioned the advantages of openness and openness meaning that there is contact between of some form between or information sharing, if nothing else, between the adoptive family and the biological family. In this case, it's a grandparent. But Dr. Branco, how often do you see it happen where it is also the biological parent. Is that an unusual thing? And in traditional adoption, the whole movement has shifted towards the benefit of openness, and we've shifted because we believe it's in the best interest of the child. But does that hold up in step-parent adoption?
I would say not as much. Again, a lot of that has to do with the prior relationships that people carried with one another that get in the way of them being able to move past that to do what's best for their child. And oftentimes for the parents that terminated their rights in order for their child to be adopted by the step-parent, there's a lot of mixed feelings that go along with that. Most often shame or guilt, or just feeling like they didn't live up to the role that they thought they should have. And that's very challenging to get past, to then be able to make yourself available for visits and continuing contact.
Do you see, when you said you don't, I think when you said not so much, were you talking about the benefits of openness, or were you talking about how often it actually occurs?
Oh, I was referring to how often it occurs. When it does occur and when it's done well, I see it being highly beneficial because, again, you're just then broadening your network of who's in your family. It helps a child and a person to build a narrative, to get the truth about their heritage, about their beginning as much as possible, to learn where they might have inherited certain traits or talents. When you don't have that, more questions can arise. But what I meant was that I don't see it happening as frequently in these types of families, unfortunately.
No, I see it as well. And Will said it well. It helped his grandparents were helping him fit into pieces of a story that for him to understand. And if they had not been a part of his life, then that would have been a huge void. And I suspect, I'm not trying to speak for you, Will, but I suspect that you would have felt that void. Would that be a fair statement?
I think that'd be a very fair statement. I mean, I didn't go in asking Grandma a lot of questions. You would just listen, and, she would tip her hand, or my grandpa would. But at the same time, I think when I got older into the high school age, I definitely would start asking questions and trying to figure out puzzle pieces without asking my mom and dad, because I didn't want them to be like, okay, he's starting to snoop right now, because I didn't want them to feel uncomfortable. But later on in life, I did figure out they knew I was asking and snooping around, but there's nothing wrong with it. It's just, as an adoptive child, you don't know all the information and all the facts, even though you trust my stepdad, if you want to, Rick, if you want to say that, and my mom to protect me. But at the same time, I was definitely, the curiosity was there, and I wanted there's always two sides of a story, right? And I tried to get the best side of my biological dad's side of the story. I got it through my grandma and grandpa.
And the interesting thing, and this is a similarity between all types of adoption, is it's the self-identity issue of, we know that we, after a certain age, we know that some of who we are and some of how we act and some of our traits and some of our gifts and some of our weaknesses all come from our genetic connection, our genetic parent. And, you called it snooping, but honestly, it seems to me just a natural information gathering, helping you figure out who you are. And outside of adoption, we do that in our families because we live daily with the parents whose genes we share. But when you don't, you have to be more creative. It sounds to me like you were just being creative. But
appreciate that.
One of the it does occur to me that as more so than in traditional adoption, step-parent adoption forces people to shift their family roles. And I as I was reading Crystal's comment about the grandmother, I thought, that's part of what's happening here. What is her role? Her perception of her role is that I'm the grandmother to this child. But in fact, I loved how you said that, Dr. Branco. She's joined this other family, and she's part of their network, adoption kinship network, but really she's a part of this family. And it seems like that not only grandparents, but aunts and uncles and those who choose to be involved, they have to accept that there's been a shift. So what can parents do to help extended family understand the shift in their role, their changing family roles? Dr. Branco?
I would agree with what you're saying. I think that this is the type of conversation that needs to be had between the parents and the extended family members without the presence of the child to whom they're discussing. And the basis for the conversation is that we want to do the best that we can for our child, but talking about now, we want to have you in our family, but that means our entire family. And spelling out with everyone involved in a collaborative and respectful manner what that means to each person, what that means to, for example, the Crystal's family. That means that maybe you come and sit and have a meal with our whole family, or you bake cookies with everyone in the family. It doesn't mean you have to get a gift for every single child, but it means make yourself available to conversation with all our children, or at least be okay with being in the same room with all of us, sharing stories with everyone. That's different for every family. So having that discussion outside of the earshot of the actual child, who would feel terrible if they heard this going on because they would feel like it's their fault, but saying we want this to be an extended open family that blends everyone. How is that going to work best for us? How do you see that looking? And also getting them to explain what their fears are in doing that. Sometimes people didn't know that was allowed. Sometimes people think, well, I'm only related biologically to this person. I didn't know I was allowed to be connected to everyone else.
Absolutely, and to let them know that they're welcome, which I think is the same thing that you're saying, that you want them in the family, and from what Will was saying, is one of the reasons you want them is that they're an important connection to that child, and honoring that importance is helpful as well. I think it helps make, and we all want to feel wanted, and we all want to feel important. We got a question that I think would be relevant to the kind of the discussion of changing family roles. This one came from Carrie. She said, my dad adopted my stepmom's 2 kids when they were in middle school. It's been over 10 years, and I still find it very, very strange. What is my relationship supposed to be with these 2 kids? My dad keeps calling them my brother and sister, which makes it even weirder. I saw the topic for this week's show and was glad because it came up again last week at Thanksgiving. Dr. Branco, can you talk at all to help Carrie understand why does it feel weird to her, and what can be done about it at this point?
Well, I would want to go back in time and find out how she was informed that this was going to happen, what role she had in that process, what kind of relationship she had with them 10 years ago or before this happened, how it shifted her relationship with her father when it happened, and I'd want to know what her relationship has been like with her brother and sister during this 10-year time, to find out what feels uncomfortable about it for her, and what are the lost pieces she might be carrying.
Yeah, I would too. I wondered the same thing when I was reading her comment. I wondered how she was a part of this decision, or at least included, and also whether she ever really lived with them, or whether this was something that this has a lot to do with her estrangement from her father.
Right.
Yeah, and what can Carrie do now? It seems to me would be to have a discussion with her dad.
I think that would be a great place to start. To have a very honest, respectful, but almost vulnerable discussion and sharing what about this feels strange and how it's hurtful to her, if it is hurtful, and what maybe they can do together to repair anything that needs to be repaired with their relationship.
And perhaps even trying to get to know these 2, 10 years are probably in their 20s now, these 2 young adults on their own, and acknowledging that they really weren't a part of, they may have their own story, and they may have something in common, feeling that it was something unusual and something weird. Right. Dr. Branco, the last question that I think we have time for is, I did want to, when parents are making a decision on whether to have the step-parent become the parent, whether the step-parent should adopt the child, any thoughts on some specific issues they should consider? Because it's not necessarily always the best decision. It often is, but sometimes it's not. So what are some of the things that they should think about before they make the decision on whether the step-parent should adopt?
Well, one of the basic pieces of advice would be to ensure they have some legal guidance, because this is a legal process that has to be gone through, and sometimes that will help people determine whether this is the right choice for their family based on what the law is in their state where they live. So that would be my first recommendation. My second would be to really explore fully what that would mean, what's the reason behind wanting to do this, and how they feel this will will enhance or bring their family closer. I'd want to make sure that was fully explored, and then take a very serious look at the relationship that the step-parent has with the child and how they see things functioning in their family, and also to kind of brainstorm and predict how this is going to shift roles with the other children in their family if there are other children.
Great advice. Thank you so much, both Will Waller and Susan Branco, Dr. Susan Branco, for being our guest today on Creating a Family. Guys, we are entering the time of giving, so you probably know what that means, or what's coming next. This show and everything we do at Creating a Family exists because of the support from people just like you. We are making a difference in the lives of families, and quite frankly, we need your support. I wanted to read you a email that I received from a social worker. Her name is Lee Varon. She said, as a social worker, I believe Creating a Family is the best resource available for anyone touched by adoption. You have never shied away from covering difficult or sensitive issues. I appreciate the perspective of intelligent inquiry and supportive understanding that has characterized Creating a Family. Thank you so much, Lee, for those kind words. And to our audience, please consider supporting our mission of providing unbiased, accurate education and support to pre- and post-adoptive families. We're a nonprofit, and all of your donations are tax-deductible. You can make the donation by going to our website, creatingafamily.org, and you can just /donations, and it will get you there. Or perhaps the easier way is in the top right corner, there's a green donate button. So you just pop over there, click donate, and it's easy. You can use your credit card. It's seamless. So please consider adding us into your end-of-year giving. We would truly appreciate it. And everybody, if you want more information on Will or on the Jockey Being Family Foundation, you can go to their website, which is jockeybeingfamily.com. To get more information about Susan Branco and her practice, you can go to her website, which is adoptiontherapist.org. All one word, adoptiontherapist.org. Thank you so much for joining us, and I will see you next week.
Come to the Home Depot this month and you'll learn a thing or two. Actually, 3, with 3 free do-it-yourself workshops. Learn how to design and care for your container garden by selecting the best soil and aesthetically arranging your plants. Learn how to install tile flooring, even how to keep your outdoor deck and patio space in the best shape possible. See, it's never too late to learn something new. Register today at homedepot.com/workshops for a do-it-yourself workshop near you. Only at the Home Depot. More saving, more doing.
Right now at the Home Depot, you'll save up to 35% off appliance special buys, like a GE Appliances top-load washer and dryer pair, with deep clean and deep rinse options, a reliable heavy-duty agitator, and 4 precise water levels, just $4.78 each. Wash, dry, save, repeat. Today is the day for doing, with Spring Black Friday savings now at the Home Depot. More saving, more doing. U.S. only while supplies last. Gas dryer extra. See store for details. Valid through April 17th.